Welcome, everyone. We're happy that you're with us today. Um, this is our 8th Salon for the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through by Genevieve and Manasi, Saxena with us today. Both of our guests will speak today. Check the bottom of your screen. You'll see that we're also at the bottom of the page is CC. That's live transcription. It's something new that we're trying today. And the chat box is going to be open. The same thing with the chat box. You can close that down if you find that distracting. We'll be having 2 people monitoring that, Liliana and Judith, today for our questions. So we'll be together for a couple of hours. Please remember to just take care of your body's needs. I know that it's different time zones. Some of you are late in the evening, early in the morning, or midday. Make sure that you stretch and move around if you need to. Hydrate, have water with you, and a little snack. Our session today is going to be recorded and will be available for viewing on our website, the maternalgifteconomymovement.org. So without further ado, let's just begin. Our first speaker today is Miki Kashtan. She's a practical visionary pursuing a world that works for all based on principles and practices rooted in feminist nonviolence. Miki is a founding member of the Nonviolent Global Liberation Community, whose purpose is to integrate nonviolence into the fabric of human life through ongoing live experiments with truth focused on individual and collective liberation. One of the most consistent experiments within the NGL is the commitment to operate on a full gift basis with both money and other resources. Miki is the author of most recently of The Highest Common Denominator, Using Convergent Facilitation to Reach Breakthrough Collaboration Decisions, and blogs at The Fearless Heart, often exploring theoretical, practical, political, and spiritual questions related to patriarchy, capitalism, and gifting. In her talk, Living a Gift Economy Within the Exchange World, she plans to describe some of the experiments within NGL in 3 areas: how to align NGL's resources flow with the deepest gifting principles, what comes into NGO, what flows within NGO, and what goes NGL, and what goes out of NGL. So without further ado, Miki.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to do something different from the usual one person speaks and then the other person speaks. We're going to go back and forth quite a bit in our presentation. So I am going to start by telling you the story, a personal story of my relationship with the gift economy. It started, like I believe it starts for all children, it starts right away. And as Genevieve Vaughn has taught us, we come into the world learning purely about the gift economy, and the exchange comes much later. So when I was 5, I don't remember this, but my mother told me this story. We went to the store and I said to her, why do we have to pay for what we're buying? Why can't we just take what we need and go? And she didn't have an answer for me. And no one to this day has had a compelling answer for me. And for years, I was trying to understand what economics is, the science, the so-called science of economics, the exchange-based economics discipline. And it never made sense to me. Now I'm really good with math, So when the opportunity arose, I took the economics Bible, macroeconomics Bible by Samuelson. Anybody who studied economics will have heard of him. I read the 400 pages, I took an exam, and I aced the exam. So I could clearly manipulate all the equations, but it still didn't make sense to me. It was years later, I remember the moment when I was walking across campus in some university, and it hit me. What hit me is that economics is based on the principle of scarcity. And it never made sense to me because scarcity never made sense to me. So then I went home and I looked it up, and sure enough, by its own definition, economics is defined as the study of the allocation of scarce resources. So it really, really helped me understand retroactively that I did not accept the principle of scarcity ever. So this was the beginning of my clarity that something else is really possible. And I have been experimenting in a variety of ways in trying to restore the flow into the world. And I believe in the indigenous wisdom that says that when we take only what we need, not more and not less, then there's always going to be enough. But because humans have started to take more than we need, then there has been less for others, because it is a finite planet. So the flow must accommodate everyone. So now we need to relearn. And the rest of the conversation is about how what the experiments are based on when we deal in particular with money within an exchange economy, where you can't exit the market in full in order to attend to needs. That's my initial thing, and Letitia, I'm giving it back to you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Manasi Saxena. She's a certified trainer with the Center for Nonviolent Communication and a founder of In Compassion. She's a learning facilitator whose focus lies in the intersection of spiritual personal growth and social change community development. She's been a part of the nonviolent communication community in India for over 10 years, during which she has organized and offered a number of international and local training events, dabbling to different degrees in gift culture. Having actively participated in emergency relief services after the violence of Northeast Delhi and during COVID lockdown in India, Manasi's core focus now is to work closely with communities at the grassroots with the vision of shifting from sustenance survival to a paradigm of sustainability, collaboration, and resilience through community-driven social change through her organization, In Compassion. Manasi, welcome.
I'm so sorry. There's something going on today with the internet, which really doesn't happen on a regular basis, but for some reason it's happening today. So I'm going to turn my video off for a moment and maybe just share my screen so that I can talk about what I would like to talk about with you. And keep my video off so that it's a little easier to talk about it. Right. So really what I want to, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Miki, for thinking of me with this, mainly because I believe I'm learning a lot just as we started exploring what we were going to talk about. I started looking really consciously at different aspects of what we've been doing, what my work has been for the last 5 years, and maybe more specifically in the last year and a half. And it brought a certain vocabulary to what we've been trying to do. And this vocabulary doesn't really exist in an accessible or comprehensible way outside. So it was really reassuring to land in that. So I'm calling this part of my part of this experiments and receiving while giving. And I want to be clear that I really have been, my entry point to gift culture has been through doing and not much. It really hasn't been, academic, and it's been intuitive and doing based. So that's where it came from. The way I came to this was essentially my access point was around nonviolent communication, particularly as we were starting to organize nonviolent communication events in India. I was on a number of organizing teams where this new idea that to my mind at that moment felt completely slightly scary and slightly bizarre of gift culture was floated. And we essentially said, let's give it a go. Um, and we went through I've had experiences with around 6 events where we've tried a large number of permutations and combinations around this, most of which were not somewhere connecting. I'll say that by the time I was done with the event organizing stint of my career, I think I was slightly shaken and there was quite a bit of alarm that was in my system. So I'll just share a little bit about how I got here. One of the things, we tried a bunch of experiments, like different variations and experiments at events. We tried to express the entire cost of the event and then share, what we would really need to be able to pay bills. And then we left it to everybody to contribute what they could. We attempted to set a minimum contribution that was lower and then offered scholarships. We attempted sliding scale payment schemes and offered scholarships. And finally, we set a very bare minimum to cover event costs, which was just the venue, not even trainer contributions, and said we'll try disbursal with invitation for contribution and a money pile. And that, of the 6 events that we tried, there was only one where we had covered all the costs and where we had a surplus. And of these, there were 3 experiences where I was legally responsible for making bill payments, and we did not have money up till the last day of the event. So and of course, I had come in through this with my energy of experimentation and let's just get it done and let's see what happens kind of thing. So I wasn't entirely prepared for the other. So coming to it relatively inexperienced, I had what I experienced as intense fear reactions and shame reactions, which left me a bit jarred. And I will come to that a little later as we have these conversations. Now, looking back at it, I kind of see that there are 2 pieces. There are 2 sort of contrary energies. There was parts of it that were flowing and parts of it that were not flowing. The parts that were flowing had to do with a deep connection to the value and purpose by which the community had come together. The second piece was around being extremely honest, radically honest and transparent when asking for support. And the third was around dialogue, and really kind of creating spaces where people could talk about their fear and their shame and their confusion and give all the strong feedback that then would later come back. In the resistance pieces, there was, of course, my internal resistance, which is what was inside of me, it was scary to be without money to contribute in events that we were part of because money was demanded. We had bills to pay. I had shame reactions, particularly to the feedback that we got from other people. Within the community, there was some strong feedback about bad planning and bad management and feeling quite unsafe, actually, and real concern, like very lived concern and panic about the future. That I don't know if this is how we're going to do this and the money is so chaotic, then how is it going to work? And along with that, there were practical and legal requirements that we needed to fulfill, which really has to do with, as I understand it right now, there are realities to contend with, even if we are living our values. So that was showing up then. The thought I have now about this is that we really didn't have, for sure did not have the vocabulary I needed to be able to articulate what we were trying to do. I wasn't ready to talk about it. I hadn't dealt with my own layers of pain. I hadn't articulated my shame around it. I hadn't connected with the fact that somewhere inside of me, not having enough money was equated with the idea of not being enough as a person. And then there's this other piece, which I'm still working on. I'm working on all of these pieces, but this last piece is particularly difficult, which is about letting go and and trusting that there will be others to take over. Miki, could you change the slide, please? So I got a crash course in this last year, the one before that, please, which was the 2020, I guess the year called 2020, where we all learned quite a bit from what's happened. In Delhi, 2020 came with violence breaking out in the northeast parts of Delhi, which were along communal lines. And just as the relief work for this was wrapping up somewhere in the middle of March, we were hit with the COVID lockdown. And in India, the COVID lockdown, I don't know how many of you know that, but in India, essentially it led to a migrant worker crisis because a large proportion of our labor force is migrant workers who come from different states and different villages to cities to work. They don't work with a lot of security, and their employers are not particularly accountable. So they were without money, without food, and there was an exodus of migrant workers who just started walking home across hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. And at this point, in both of these situations, we had a massive citizens' response. Many of us, we were talking about this today, many of us felt this kind of compulsion to sort of just get up and start doing something about it, because it was extremely unnatural to see our fellow human beings struggling, dying, and us doing nothing about it. And all of this was quantified within the system as when we were talking about it, it was called volunteerism, it was called charity, it was called all kinds of things. And essentially all of this is giving, what I'm understanding now is this is giving as it lives within the system. It's not that there might be an impression sometimes that the exchange economy and the fact that money is so important and to getting things done I guess I grew up with the idea that this is how the world works, like a scarcity kind of space is how the world works. But this was extremely visible that actually there are enough people showing up. It's almost like the emergency kind of challenged the idea that, because it was suggesting somewhere that all the systems that were in place, that had been put in place by the system, all these things that did exist, were not really supporting basic survival. And as we found in the work that we did, we found that most people started just sort of stepping up. And it wasn't just people with privilege, it was people who were police officials, there were people who were beneficiaries of the charity that was given, all of whom were performing small acts of gift giving. And I have a strong belief that this is what actually led to survival. And this is what led to a few personal shifts, which I want to just name before we get to the next part of this, and I'll do that very quickly. Miki, could you just, the next slide, please? Right. My learning from last year is essentially that my resistance to the gift economy has actually been a resistance to receiving. Resistance that lives inside of me, and the kind of what I want to focus my attention on today is about how it shows up within me and what impact that does have. And the way it shows up inside me is through core beliefs that many of us may be able to identify in ourselves, like a belief that I'm not good enough, a belief that I don't actually I'd like to check if you can hear me.
We can hear you now, Manasi.
Yeah, right. Okay, so core beliefs of not mattering, not being good enough, not having value, not having meaning, and of being alone. These were living kind of unconsciously, like unwelcome, unconscious residents inside of me. What has happened now is there's a conscious choice, because all of these truths, the shifts towards conscious assumptions that I've listed there, these are things that started showing up just in the show, just in what I was doing, it was very clear that what I was doing mattered. It mattered inherently, regardless of whether I was aware it mattered or not. And this was true of everybody. Each individual showing up was contributing in some way. And somehow between all of us, we had, nobody had the full picture, but everybody had little pieces of it. And that was enough to support. So somewhere in the work, there's a conscious shift to just kind of being aware, I guess, of these core beliefs as they show up and challenging them with more conscious assumptions along the lines that I've listed. That's all I want to say at the beginning. And I think I've said quite a bit with difficult internet connection. So I'm handing it back to you now, Miki.
Thank you. And so I'm now going to start my own side of the presentation. So I want to now present a kind of a framework that I have developed for how to guide us through the challenges of moving in the direction of the gift economy within an exchange world. It's very different to live a gift economy in an exchange world or to live a gift economy when the whole world functions as a gift world. Then it's easy, but there are a lot of challenges which Manasi already named some of them, and that will come up when I go through this. So the reality is that even when we want to create a gift economy and move in that direction, we are still, every single one of us, products of the exchange economy. So inside of us, and Manasi gave a lot of detailed examples of this, it lives within us. The patterns of patriarchal capitalist scarcity and exchange-based patterns are in us. So we are always dealing with external challenges and internal challenges. So I divided for ease and clarity into there are three parts that we need to shift. One part, and all of this is about money. It's not about flow of resources that are not non-monetary. It's about how to experiment with changing the way that money flows for as long as we need to be in relationship with the market in order to attend to needs. Anytime a group of people has sufficient capacity to produce all that they consume, they no longer need the market and they can live in full gift economy. But as long as we don't produce all that you consume, you need the market. And then you have these three areas. One is, how does money come in? The second area is, how is money distributed within the organization or the group or community that is doing the experiment? And the third is how money is given to others who are still within the exchange economy. So as you can see, it's hardest to have a say in how money is given to others because you want their services and they dictate the conditions. So you will see when we get there that it's hardest to shift the relationships in that direction. It's easiest to shift the relationships of distribution within the organization because ultimately nobody can tell you what to do. So mostly you're dealing only with internal challenges. And there is some say that you have when you offer something to the world and you want to receive money to support your capacity to sustain yourself in doing it, you have some say in how money comes in. So the challenges, in relation to how money comes in, is that when I offer something and I ask for money, it is hard for people to uncouple giving from receiving, which is key to gifting. So we need things to support people in doing this uncoupling. The second thing is, even when we are fully in a gift economy, which we never fully are, but even when we are, others aren't. So it will be easy for them to kind of like fall into habits of exchange, value, obligation. Freeing people from that is another challenge. And the third is that a lot of times people have fear about it being open-ended. I am right now, for example, in a conversation with an organization that I offer my work through that organization in part, and asking them to come into a partnership with me around offering it on a gift basis rather than on a fixed price basis. And I see that it's really, really hard for them to step into the full risk with me, with us, when we're doing this. There are quite a number of challenges in terms of how we share money within an organization. Because, for example, we need to share money in relation to sustainability needs, but most of us are used to asking for money to attend to relational needs. In other words, I ask you to give me money so that I can feel appreciated, but that money has nothing to do with appreciation. It's just that we have done this messiness of coupling it. We bring in deserve thinking, and it's very hard to really know what is it that I really need to sustain myself that isn't about what I deserve. When we start having these conversations, a lot of trauma comes up and we need to care for that. I am not able to see one of the things. So there's the question of how much the risk is shared and how much intimacy and vulnerability we're able to live with each other, and what if the two don't match each other. And the last one is particularly interesting, which is when people live in different places within the power map of the world, they're used to different lifestyles. So if you don't do things with great consciousness, just being in dialogue about who needs what can easily reproduce inequalities in resources, because the people who come from backgrounds where they have learned to make do with little will ask for less. And so the dialogue will not reflect true needs. And lastly, the challenges that we have in terms of giving money to others is that others are still in full exchange principles. And if we try to ask them questions about needs, they don't even know how to think about it. And the second is that very often when we engage with the market, there's no relationship. And in order to do dialogue, you need to have some relationship. So I am going to now give it back to Manasi to look at how some of these challenges are handled within the organization that she has, and then come back to my organization. And then depending on the time, we will engage with each other in questions.
Okay, well, before I say anything about these challenges and these three different aspects that Miki listed, I want to just share that the organization is called End Compassion. And I want to focus, just to give you a sense of what we do three things. One is around community-driven development, which is kind of what you see on the picture at the top, which is we do these sessions with communities where we facilitate, we step in as a facilitating role with resources that the community can then direct in the direction that they would like to go. So we do not come in with any predetermined solutions. We come in with basically openly with empathy to see what they'd like to do. And we use different processes for this. One of those actually is convergent facilitation. The second thing we do is something called Living Bridges, which is about bringing the wisdom and understanding in the nonviolent communication world to social change, and vice versa. And the third piece is around emergency relief, which I've talked a little bit about. I don't want to say too much about that, and it's all available on the website if anybody's interested. We found that in the living of this experiment, when we want to live, when we basically show up empty-handed, willing to, uh, I mean, part of there are points of tension. One is around social accountability to people who give us money, and legal compliance to people who, we would ideally not like to go to jail. So really, that's kind of important. The second is around financial sustainability, and I guess financial sustainability in itself is about sustainability. Just how do we keep afloat? How do we keep doing the work that we're doing in the world that we're doing it in? There's a tension within the inner and outer ways of being. I've kind of spoken a little bit about my tensions, and then there are team-wide, like the pushes and pulls about how we would like to be seen as a collective. And the last piece, which shows up almost as a confluence of all of these things, is around alignment and mission drift. Mission drift as something that, where in order to stay afloat, we might have to make choices that is not really in alignment with our vision. And how do you learn to say no to that, which is kind of a tricky thing. So I had thrown Mickey's slides in here just for reference. Now, what we do at End Compassion, how money comes in at End Compassion, how we're experimenting with this is, one of the reasons that we've kind of done this is also because when End Compassion made a shift from being a training organization to a relief organization. Anyway, when we were making this shift, and when we were reorienting ourselves from this NVC training focus to being much more connected with the communities we wanted to work with, we were in a state of disaster. And in a state of disaster, and when it comes down to relief and emergency kind of situations, essentially you want to be as flexible as you can be. So it doesn't matter where the money comes from. And we've kind of integrated that into our model. We have a flexible way of receiving. We have different ways through which money comes in. One is through gifts. One is through what we receive in exchange for services. Um, in the context of the services, we do have a price. We do name a price. We sometimes have a sliding scale, and we mention scholarships because and the reason we chose to do this is because it's recognizable, and at the same time, and it's recognizable enough to bring people to us so that we can start having the conversations we need to have with them. And then internally, we have conversations about our fears, our willingness around risks, and how much is too much, how much are we willing to stretch. Some of the lived challenges we've had is that naming the cost really does lead to questions about, um, it has the main problem with that is that you're linking the value of what you do with the money you're charging, which is really it's a terrible equation. There is no such link. And because we want to honor accessibility needs in India, we've priced our things relatively low. So it does have this risk of being seen as a bunch of people who offer cheap workshops, which is not, again, really not what we're doing. The second really concrete challenge we had was the legal system in India does not have a provision for a flow of giving and receiving. So we've had to do we've been very careful, and this was a really important piece for us because when we came in, we were engaged in emergency relief, and that was a long communal line. So we were skirting around pieces that could be seen very quickly as political. So being accountable and being compliant was essential for the safety of our work. So we've worked extensively to make sure that everything we do exists in the system, and then there are compromises that are made because the system doesn't allow for it. And then there is this question of accountability. There's funding that comes in and gifts that come in from people who are joyfully willing to give. And then there are funders. In fact, today is a great day to have this conversation because a couple of days back, our funding relationship with somebody just came to an end. And the continuity of that relationship depended on whether or not what we were doing fit their mandate, which has to do quite a bit with, their accountability within the same legal system. So a lot of flow of resources is restricted on the basis of this. How we've held this is really to be careful about compliance, we have been willingly naming a cost to meet people where they are, because like Miki said, I think the easiest part to address is the part that's in the middle, which is how we distribute money internally. When it comes to receiving money and to giving money, to some extent, we've adjusted our expectations, I think, and met people where they are. so that we're not compromising on a sense of value, and we definitely stay afloat and keep doing the work we're doing. And some, to a great degree, accepting risk, owning vulnerabilities, and making some conscious choices. Making conscious choices about where we say yes and where we say no, for sure. Um, the second, as Miki had said, was around, this is from her slide actually, is the challenges around distributing money within the organization. How this manifests in compassion, and this is just pure self-assessment, is that um, we have actually been quite careful about distributing money based on need. We found different ways of disbursing money within the organization. So there are people who do receive regular salaries, and there are people who have, I've been scolded severely into not offering regular salaries because they were very clear that we'll take money when we want to. One person who receives money only for coffee. This is a conscious choice. Some scolding was involved, and one person, and then there are some people who just don't want any money at all and are happy to contribute their time. And this is, again, the way we came to this decision was really around with conversations and focusing on connection. Um, a lot of the challenges for us in this space were around trusting that we are enough and trusting that this is okay. Are we really getting this right? Is this really going to work? Because again, and this was again, I think, the benefit of this entire process for me being here, because the absence of this language makes it so difficult to trust that what is happening intuitively is okay, and we're okay as we are. Um, we also, somewhere, this piece about caring for the capacity to voice needs has to do with privilege. And so one, uh, I think we generally do, uh, well, since I have learned from Miki, I think we've adopted the asking three times until we're sure that what is being spoken is absolutely true, particularly with the women in the organization, particularly with, and also with the people who need to have regular salaries in order to make ends meet. um, we again hold conversations around the challenge is to uncouple the amount of work I do with how much money I make. And again, the accountability within the system is pretty important, because for a funding agency and for us to stay afloat, we may need a funding agency. It's really essential to somewhere, at least within the context we're in, it's important to show what you're doing with the money that comes to you. So who is getting what salary is something that has to be determined according to the system. So it's a bit it's a push and pull and quite a lot of negotiation. I've listed 5 pieces about how we hold this, and the core of this, I think I can really say, is um, we dialogue and we talk about things, and it sounds pretty simple, but it's a really important, extremely ongoing kind of process. We ensure that when feedback comes that something isn't working, we take that home and we work on it. We understand feedback in different layers. We've been careful about when decisions are taken that impact everybody's involved in making those decisions. um, I am currently holding the leadership in this organization, so I'm trying to hold myself as accountable as possible, because I do believe the system has to somewhere suggest that I'm accountable as a leader. And somewhere it's also been about letting go of the idea that we'll get it right or that it'll be perfect. So, and I think that's an ongoing thing, that every day is different. Every day we learn. Every day we attempt to do what we would like to do. And the driving force of that is the values or the purpose of the organization. And I think I can say just a couple of sentences about that, which is the way decisions are taken at End Compassion has to do with conversations and values. Is at the same time, somewhere we're very clear that the core of our work is community, and it's about the communities we reach. And these are people who live in tin shed slums, who have very little to eat, and who struggle with day-to-day needs. And one of the questions we ask ourselves, as Gandhi would have asked himself, is what we are doing in service of those people? And that gives quite a lot of clarity to the decisions that are made. And finally, in money given to others. Now, our money giving to others has partly, yes, we bought Zoom, we're, we some services we do buy, but most of the money that we give is given to communities who are in need of receiving. So a lot of the work that we've done has actually been around how can communities receive Like, how do we ensure that when they receive resources from us, it's clear that it's not with an assumption that they need to perform some sort of um, like a gymnastic process to prove that they deserve it, I guess. So a lot of one of the core things we're doing is to ensure that the community, like that's the core, is that the community will choose how they use the resources that they get. They choose the trajectory of the development. They choose the prioritization, like prioritize what issues they want to deal with first, and they decide how they're going to deal with it. Uh, we have been very careful about one particular requirement, which is around food, not in emergency situations, but in and I mean even in especially in emergency situations actually, but in the community, if the requirement for food is raised, questions are not asked beyond a baseline verification, and this is a conscious choice because a number of interventions on the ground when it comes to food has to do with people performing some sort of test, whether it's just presentation of a card or if it's something. It depends on, I mean, it could be a presentation of an identity verification. It could be that you need to perform some sort of service in order to get food. It could be whatever. When it comes down to food, because we see that as the absolute basic essential need for human life, we don't ask questions. And that's been a conscious thing. That's been pretty impactful in many ways. We restrict our role consciously to to facilitative non-interventions. We do not intervene. We facilitate dialogue. In the larger sense of the social sector here, I guess what we are doing can be kind of called a model of cash relief or informal microfinance. And we're still trying to, and again, this is about building a vocabulary that works. And on that note, we are actually, this piece around vocabulary hit home really strongly because a core reason for us doing the work we're doing is to create kind of a blueprint around community-driven social change. So what would it be like? How would it be if the community was to drive their own destiny? Um, Again, the lived challenges are also around vocabulary because we're kind of making it up as we go along to a great degree. Um, we have to address our own privileges as we go on the ground. For example, sometimes the community might choose not to do something that we really think they would need. So we had a strong assumption that they needed toilets. And as it turns out, they really did not want to focus the resources that they were given towards toilets. They wanted to do something different, which was to ensure education for their children. And so there was a little push and pull inside of us as well, because when I live in a house like I do, a clean toilet is something I come to assume is a basic human right, or a basic human need for that matter. I mean, sure, it's a basic human right. And it was very interesting to see what came up for us and for them when this discussion came up. We also address one of the things that comes up is privilege within the community, because the community is not heterogeneous, like it's not homogeneous. It's a community that has old and young people, people who are Hindus and Muslims, people with different backgrounds, people with different layers, and men and women, and there's all kinds of social customs that weave into their day-to-day existence. And somewhere I think the fact of it is a lot of this has to do with being able to do the work within, which means that the kind of people who can do what we're doing, at least as of now, is people who have some degree of training in empathic listening, which could be through NVC, it could be through a different modality, or some capacity to be present, which might even just be innate. And it's not the easiest to come by or to find. I guess it's not the easiest thing to name in a hiring process, in a standard hiring process. We hold this again through internal training, dialogue. We do lots of debriefs. There's layers of feedback. There's lots of self-reflection. There's an attempt to hold the leader as a person who just has a role to play that is embodied in the leadership pieces. We're working on that, and I think a huge part of this is just trusting the process and patience that it's not going to happen overnight, because it hasn't so far. I'll just list the last pieces of this out for me. The 5 key pieces that I thought were key things, that at least qualities of being that have helped. One is around being able to truly listen to the other person, which is what we call empathy, and to be able to listen to oneself. Uh, a high level of integrity in the decision making around ensuring that it's driven by values. Um, Something about connection being the driving force. So NVC talks about communication as, or just talks about a flow of giving and receiving, and connection as this sort of, and I believe that I call it demystified magic, because I don't think connection, I don't think the magic that happens on the ground, or the confluences that you come by, that, you know, money shows up when you're doing what's close to your heart, etc., is actually, but I don't think it's particularly magical. I think it's just that it serves connection, it serves life, and as a result, things just sort of show up. I can quantify that more later if needed. um, Consciously embracing our own imperfections and the imperfections in the system, taking help where we get them, get help. We've, like I said, we've collaborated with the police here, which, considering, you know, the Delhi riots involved, there's definitely some judgments we have about the police in the Delhi riots. On the other hand, in the COVID relief, the police was incredibly helpful. So really kind of being open to connection when it's available. And somewhere a huge part of this was about, at least for me, it was really about looking at what stays inside me as a resistance to receiving. And that's where I think Miki's deserved thinking piece comes up, because a lot of the messaging, a lot of what I've learned and internalized early in life has been about not deserving love, not deserving support, not deserving this, you know, it can't be available to me just because I asked for it or just because I need it. And yet that's not true. Everything I need is available to me. So the resistance is now inside me, and then that's the piece that I want to work on. That brings me to the close of what I wanted to say. Successfully without the collapse of the internet. Thank you. Okay. Miki.
All right, thank you. I want to say that we haven't talked with the organizers. I am hoping that we can find a way to have the actual presentations on the website, so that people who listen to the recording or who were here can also look at the presentations, because I'm not going to be able to go through everything that is in the presentation. I'm going to focus on just a couple of things to illustrate some points. But hopefully there will be a way for there to be a PDF that people can look at. So here is an example of one of the challenges that comes up that I mentioned earlier, the challenge about how to invite money in. A lot of people are very fearful of moving from fixed price to open-ended, please give what you can and what you're willing. And the key is we can't overstretch. If we overstretch, we bring scarcity to how we ask for money. And if we bring scarcity to how we ask for money, people are going to be less motivated to give. So essentially, there is work to be done to accept the risk and release the attachment to outcome. And when we do that, we also discover that even if we have a fixed price, we can't really control the outcome, because we never know how many people are going to come or participate or whatever. So this is one piece of it. I want to look at the questions, the challenges that arise within distribution of money. And the way we distribute money within this community, NGL, and the money gets distributed among the people who are doing the work of sustaining the infrastructure of the organization. This is a virtual community. Everything that we're offering, everything that we're doing is all virtual. And it takes a lot of work to sustain it all. We don't have enough money for all of it. So we have the challenge of being in dialogue amongst people who know that there isn't going to be enough money for everyone. So one of the challenges is very hard to uncouple sustainability needs from relational needs when there isn't enough of a relationship. When there is a lot of relationship, when you are part of a community that is really strong, all the relationships that are, all the needs that have to do with appreciation, connection, and all of these things don't need money to be attached to them. But if the relationships are not as strong, it's hard. So then we need to always be in touch with capacity and build relationship over time. And then I'm trying to think of what else to share. In terms of the piece that I raised about power and privilege differences, this is a really, really difficult one, because the way that we distribute money is through open dialogue. We all know how much money each of us requested and how much money we currently have. It creates quite a bit of stress when we do this 3 times a year now. It creates quite a bit of stress when we all know that the amount of money that we have is not enough to cover the needs that we have. And how do we distribute it in a way that really cares for everyone? I'm not going to tell you that we already know how to do that. Right? What I do know is that we learn, and each time it gets better. And one of the pieces that makes it really difficult is that all of us carry shame about money. And so, you know, people have shame about having more than they need. People have shame about having all that they need, even if it's not more. And people have shame about not having enough, regardless of where we are, because of the way that we've been trained in patriarchal exchange base. We all carry shame. And so we need to accompany each other. So the facilitation of those circles is very intensive, so that we can really track each other and see where people give up, when people overstretch. We care for each other. We transfer money between one and the other until it settles. And we know where it is that is the optimal distribution for now. I think this is just about the time. So I'm going to stop here, and more things can come up when we have the questions. So I think it's time for the Q&A at this point.
Would you like to have a little bit of a discussion, Miki, with Manasi before we actually go to the Q&A? Take about 10 minutes.
Sure, let's do that. Manasi, do you have any questions for me?
I'm wondering if you wanted to, do you feel complete with your presentation? Because I know there was quite a lot more. And
I think that to be complete, I would probably need a lot more time, but if you have a specific question, it can kind of like zero in and pinpoint.
I really do want, I think one of the pieces that would be really helpful for me to hear more about was the power and privilege piece and how you're holding that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to say more?
Yeah, sure. So this is completely on a learning edge, in the sense that we don't actually know how to do this. And there are people who are feeling really intensely challenged about us doing it at all, and would prefer that we did it in a more fixed way, or tying it to money per hour, which we are really trying to stay away from. But what happens is that it puts people at a position to ask. For people who are, you know, who have experienced being part of impoverished communities, who have actually experienced not having enough to eat in their life, saying this is what my need is an extremely vulnerable and challenging element. So that's an open question. What do we do to create the conditions for people to be able to actually accurately assess their needs and make a request is not a small thing. And it ties to also what you said in your presentation. It ties to the challenge that you said about receiving. That
Yes.
there's something about accepting that it's okay to receive, that it's okay to need all that I need, and not just the bare minimum of the bare minimum of the bare minimum that will allow me to eat, tomorrow and pay my rent for the next week. It's like really supporting people in being able to really put all their needs on the table. And conversely, on the other end, if you come from privilege, certain things feel to you like needs that from another perspective, one would go, really? Do you really need that? Why on earth do you really need it? And so those gaps can only be closed over time through relationships and through basic trust.
Yeah, I really love what you say about building that intimacy, and that sort of, I guess, the bridge is intimacy and vulnerability, and without that, it can't really happen. And the other piece that's coming to me is around, I think this is something that came up in the workshop before the 9 days that we had in Jaipur, where you had mentioned, you caught me on it, and it was about shame. Because I said, I feel shy. And you said, are you sure you feel shy? Or is that shame? And over the last 3 or 4 years, it's kind of crystallized. It's become so clear to me that this is shame I carry as a woman who lives in this country, who was brought up, despite being brought up by a fairly liberal family. I continue to carry this idea that actually I can only ask for what I need when I'm at the absolute edge of my my resources.
Yeah.
And this is an active challenge. I think it just, because you mentioned patriarchal trauma, and that sort of, it's a live thing, it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, I want to say something about the concept of risk sharing, which is not very familiar to people. And risk sharing is not a binary thing. You are fully at risk sharing or not at all. But to be in community, to really be in community, is to share material risks. I'm talking about material risks. And, communities, I think many communities in the global South still have actual physical risk sharing, which means, it's like if the harvest is not good, it's not just one person who is affected. Or if one person has a problem, then other people will come in. You kind of hold the totality together. People who are part of the global North mostly no longer know what community and risk sharing is. It's kind of like, if you are sick, it's too bad, maybe we will bring you soup. But if eventually you can't go back to work and earn your salary, there isn't a web of giving and receiving that holds you. It doesn't exist. So people have a true sense of being alone, which I think is seeping into parts of India at least.
Sure.
Because otherwise you wouldn't even have this idea of being alone doing things. You can only feel alone when you're outside of a web of community and risk sharing. So part of what we're trying to do is work more and more towards more risk sharing rather than less. This is the ultimate vision, is to exit the market economy, have physical community, not just virtual, and really be kind of like mutually accountable to each other, so that we make decisions, not like you make the decisions and I make the decisions, but we make them together. What is it that we can afford? Not what you can afford and what I can afford, but what is it that we can afford that will still care for all of us? Yeah. And I have a question to you, which is, if you can say something about, if there is something to say about the relationship between the people who get a regular salary and those who don't.
Absolutely, I can say that. It actually ties up with what you just said about this sort of alienation from community in India, which you can pretty much see, like there's a little layer of people who make enough or who make much more than enough, and then there's the layer of people, there's a whole chunk of people who do not make, I mean, who have to be interdependent to survive. Um, the people in my organization who receive a salary are people who come from the daily wage or migrant worker community. While we were doing the relief work, in fact, there were two of them, both of whom, it's not like, I'm fairly sure they both have alternative sources of income in addition to the small amounts of money we do offer. Um, and yet they were both very committed and really wanting to contribute to what we were doing, and they've stuck on for the last 7 or 8 months. So they receive the regular salaries. One other person receives a regular salary because, again, he has to contribute to sustainability in his household, which all of us do have to contribute to sustainability in our households, but some of us don't. Like, I don't have that much of pressure around it, as much pressure as I could have around it, as say the two guys on the ground. So those are the people who receive the regular salaries. And for those two guys who are on the ground all the time, who've done all kinds of amazing, nothing short of heroic work during the COVID periods. I mean, when we were pulling together to do that, um, their salaries is kind of the baseline for making sure the organization functions. So the funding relationship that just ended has to do with that not being. So it's interesting, and I think that um, the other piece I think that's kind of important around that was somewhere around November we were at a point where we had completely run out of money, and I had this kind of, I have to figure this out on my own thing happening. Eventually, this was resolved by naming it and sharing it and asking for help, and it worked out. And now I think there's a fairly conscious, named, collective sense that yes, the baseline for us to remain sustainable is for these two people to be paid. That is absolutely sacrosanct. There's no push and pull or play around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that tells me that you have become a we.
Yes. Yeah. A beautiful we. Grateful every be part of it. Yeah. But yes.
Not a collection of eyes, but a we.
Yeah.
And that move from a collection of eyes to a we, I think, is essential for reintroducing the gift economy, because the gift economy is based on a relationship and orientation to others' needs. And you can only orient to others' needs when you are not a separate I. And to look back at Genevieve's work, the mother who gives to the child is not a separate I. The child is part of a we that the mother is oriented towards within a larger thing that holds it. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah. I just want to also say that I think that shift started happening when I started talking about money.
Mm-hmm.
And it was specifically the money that made it happen. It was very interesting. It was quite an education. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Shall we take questions? And I'm also wondering, Genevieve, if you wanted to say something. You sometimes have things to say, or maybe later.
Yeah, thank you both for this very interesting presentation that you've given us. That really, Manasi, you're showing us India from a point of view that we haven't seen, from your internal point of view, and it's great to see what you've been doing and what other people have been doing to help through this crisis that we're in. It's great. And Miki, your explanations of how things work are always fascinating. And I think that actually the gift economy happens at a lot of different levels. And so we're all kind of working in our different areas, like different kinds of active cells that eventually will enlarge enough so that the whole society will change, because that's really what has to happen. And I see you as these kind of mechanisms of making things turn, you know, from the ground level, and it's great to watch. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
So
I wanted to just, Miki, did you want to respond?
no, I was just saying, you know, maybe it's time for questions from the attendees if you have any.
Yes, what I'd like to say here is that I want to thank Manasi and Miki. You've given a particular point of view about how the maternal gift economy is happening in the world today. And Miki, you point out specifically this relationship to the exchange economy, which has come up so often in our talks about money. How do we live in a moneyed world when we really want to be in the gift economy world? And Manasi, your slides and your personal experience and the engagement has brought it directly to each individual of seeing that as what Genevieve points out in terms of what is unseen, of what it means to be human. We each must go through our own journey of integrating and delving into these different areas that you've pointed out. And Diane had put up that we will put up the slides, you give them to us, and we'll post them with the video so that they're available. And we'll check, would you like them to be able to download that so that if they would like to be able to have it so they can study it, that would also be available. Is that okay with both of you?
Yeah, I just would want to have, you know, contact information and how people can connect with us, etc.
Absolutely.
We'll work that out.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so important because this has been a central theme in the main questions that come to us is how do I, and someone actually put it in the chat, how do I become a we? So this is, you know, and Manasi actually says, first I have to actually address my own challenges before, and each individual addresses their own challenges, and then we can become a we. It's much easier in the process to become a we when we're inviting those challenges together. So thank you so much. And I do think that we have questions, and I'm very excited to hear what they are. So Liliana, would you like to begin?
Yes, I have a question from Jackie Roach to both of the speakers. And she says, I have experimented with gift economy. I love it in principle. However, I felt very hurt when someone chooses to not gift at all. This has happened every time. And I see them out. I live in a small city, spending lots of money. I have only once received what I would like to receive and get extremely disheartened by the small donations. But I do receive beautiful feedback from my work. Do you have anything to support me to meet my needs of sustainability and willingness to stay in gift economy?
I can take this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the first thing that I can think of to say is, if you are hurt when somebody doesn't give, it means you didn't release the attachment to outcome. And that's pretty deep work to do, to actually accept that. For me, it's now really, really deeply, deeply integrated into me, which is I don't want to receive any money that would come to me based on obligation. I only want to receive money if somebody is actually willing to give it. And if I just evaluate what they can because I see that they spend money someplace else, then I am still holding them in some kind of an exchange. There's some kind of a deep release that is necessary that has to do with giving what I have to give completely with full abandon, and then opening myself separately to receive whatever comes without any restrictions. These are two separate movements, two separate moments. If I collapse them into one, then I'm still in the exchange. So that's all I can say to you is work on uncoupling, uncoupling, uncoupling. It's not easy work. It's work over time.
I can add a little bit.
Thank
just
you,
on
Miki.
okay.
Manasi, did you want to respond to that as well?
Does it make sense to do that, or would it be better to do one question at a time and then just kind of keep going?
It's fine if you would also like to input to that,
I
because I
had
think
a
it's
little teeny tiny input about the letting go of outcome and letting go of the attachment to outcome. I think a huge part of that for me has been allowing for my anger and frustration to be named somewhere safely, because otherwise it lives inside me and I'm holding on to it, rather than kind of somewhere, to be sure that I'm not living in the gift economy because I should be living in the gift economy, but that I'm doing it out of choice. And then, so a little bit of yelling and anger in a safe place I think that's okay. That's
That's so human. It's so good. Genevieve, I wondered if you could just bring in like the unilateral, the language for that, because I think it's important to say it out loud again. Giving and receiving in that unilateral way is so
Yeah.
important.
Well, it's just that it's a different logic, that the unilateral gift is a different logic from the gift that expects a return. And when it is passed on, it is creates a different kind of flow from the one that expects a return. So I think that, and then it can expand a lot more, and it's a different kind of mentality that goes with it. That's and it's what we learn in the beginning from our mothers, because they have to give to us unilaterally, because we can't give back in exchange. And I think that's the pattern that goes into language and into a whole lot of other aspects of our lives that we don't recognize. So when we are actually doing unilateral gifting, we are acting in accordance with the deep patterns of our own humanity. And that is, if we can make that happen, it can work in a revolutionary way or a re-evolutionary way.
Thank you, Jen. So very true. How about our next question from Judith?
This is a question to both panelists. Could you describe a session, give us an example of a discussion in which you were discussing how to divide up money among the members of the group?
I can say some, but I think it will be somewhat disappointing because they're never the same. It's not like there is a conversation and you discuss it. We started our experiments in this way based on work done by Dominic Barter in Brazil. And then we from there adapted and adapted. But the basic thing is that you actually make moves with the money. And you can take money from whatever still exists to yourself or you can move it to someone else, or you could even move from you to someone else, or from someone else to yourself. And it is intense. There's crying, there is shutting down, there's a lot that happens. And everybody who is part of it learns something each time. So any one time that you do it can look quite traumatic and painful, but everybody's doing it willingly. It's a very odd thing to say. It's like a form of service to the whole, to humanity, to relearn pathways of being willing to really put on the table what I really need, to be daring. You know, like I will give an example. I participated in about 10 of those, or maybe even more, before I was willing to take money and move it towards myself, because myself is not myself. Myself, I am part of an organization that is actually the fiscal sponsor of NGL. It's very complicated, but I have been participating in these things not only through NGL, but until a certain moment, I was always living semi-consciously with the idea that everybody else is an individual and therefore their needs count first. Because as an organization, we can somehow figure out how to make up for things differently, not remembering very vividly that I was always the main source of income for that organization. And so I would just let everybody else do what they were going to do. And then sort of like whatever was left is what came with me to my organization. And it was a milestone, like a major event, to actually see the moment when I took money and said, I'm taking money from the amount that we have to the organization. It was so transformative. It's very hard to explain. It's like a moment of saying, we actually exist, we actually have needs, and they matter. So I don't know if that was at all helpful, and I'm happy to have follow-up questions. And there are some blog posts on my blog site that describe some pieces of this. And I'm thinking that we can add some pointers as part of the documents that we upload later. But I'm happy for follow-up questions if this wasn't clear. And Manasi, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, so we've not actually done a process at all, which is why I was hesitating to answer. We haven't sat together and dealt with who's going to get what money. What we have reached is, and I think this is because the way the money conversations are happening is, I'm slowly making transparent what I've been doing on my own. So I'm consciously making it as visible as possible to the entire organization. Again, we're a small group. So when I say organization, it sounds very fancy, but we're a small little collective. So making it transparent to the collective. And we're at the point where we're looking at how much are we collectively receiving and where is it collectively going. So there is clarity about that now. The way I understand it, at least the way I'm holding it for myself, and it's a conscious thing, is to map out what I do, make it visible, and be ready to let go of the things that other people don't want to do, or to add things to the same process. So, or change the process entirely, basically. So, but I think I'm still at that point of making it honestly visible and as clear as possible. And yeah, that's where we are. So we don't have a process yet. We do have what Miki mentioned was a money pile. We do have elaborate schemes, hopes and dreams to do a money pile with the grassroots work actually in the communities that we work with, because I think that could be a reasonable way to merge a cash relief model with collaboration and yeah, to see. Haven't done that yet. We'll let you know how it goes. That's where we are.
Well, Manasi, I understand that your organization itself facilitates for a community. So do you find it easier to facilitate the community to express their needs than for you to express your needs to each other?
It's a really good question. I think we're working on it. No, I think it's a little easier amongst the organization here. I mean, within ourselves. And I see kind of a parallel when you say that. There's a parallel in how much transparency shows up in the community and how much transparency there is within us, for sure. So there is definitely a shared growing experience that's happening. Yeah. Yeah, that I don't know if that answers the fullness of that question, but that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, that does, because there is something about how we do for ourselves. And what Miki was saying was that as the organization, she didn't see the need for the organization amongst the conversation, but also within the organization, there are needs where the money does come in. This is something that demonstrates the flow that Miki talks about. It's from the outside into an organization to how we actually address the outside resources to, in your case, the service community itself and what their true needs are. So these are, both of you are describing the challenges of communication, language, and interpersonal transparency and directness. Jen, I don't know if you had anything to offer.
Well, and you just talked about the money pile. Tell us about how that works, that you sit together around a money pile. Explain the way you have it set up.
So, it has many variations. The original one, the experiments that Dominic Barter was doing, still doing in Brazil. It's an intact community that does it within itself. And yes, people sit together and there's a literal pile of money and they distribute the money. And what we have done within NGL is different enough that we no longer use the term money pile because we want to honor the work that was done and let people use the word for what they use it. So we're calling what we're doing a financial gift hub. And the moment of distribution, we call it literally the distribution circle of the financial gift hub. And because we are a virtual community, it happens on a Zoom call. There's a Zoom call and there's a spreadsheet and people literally make moves. Like I want to put, $700 into this person and somebody makes the moves on a spreadsheet and you see it moving around.
Wow.
Beautiful. Are we ready for the next question?
Yes.
Liliana, can you bring one to us, please?
Yes. I have a question from Susan Kirsch. Excellent presentation to both of the panelists. I wonder if you have an opinion about the recent US 1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. Does it mirror the gift economy?
I think we would need to know more about it. Both of us have been in other places and not in the US during the COVID. So, and there may be others who wouldn't know what that is. Can you say a bit about what it is before we can answer?
I can go to another question.
Okay.
Okay, from Sherilyn Collymore. Do you categorize the offerings in any way? I work in special education, for example. This is an emerging area.
I'm sorry, Manasi, if you understand the question and can answer it, please take it.
No, not clear about the question. The offerings of, I'd like more clarity about what that means. The offerings piece. If she's still there, maybe she could put it in the chat.
Yeah, that's what I have. But in any case, I'm guessing that the offerings are the gift. In any case, I can go to a third question if we can just go.
Okay.
Okay, third question from Lou Thompson. How do I know if I don't actually need all I think I need? because I was born into privilege. How can I more reliably assess? I hope this works.
I have something I can say about that. Again, like many things, it's a practice over time. It's not something that you can know instantly. But I would say, create a list for yourself of the things that you think you need and quantify them. Put dollar amounts or whatever the currency is that you use. And then you have a list, an amount of money that it takes to cover all your needs for the month, for the year, or whatever. You can start training yourself to release by giving away whatever you have that is beyond what you have named that you need. Before you even question how much you really need, if you begin to give away what you don't need, you release your attachment to accumulation. And then what you can do is for each of those needs, you can ask yourself if there is a way of attending to that need, to the depth of that need, that isn't through buying something. Because one of the things that capitalism has created for us is converting needs to consumption. And relearning how to meet needs not through the market is one of the skills that we need to learn if we want to create a world beyond capitalism and exchange and restore the gift economy principle as a flow, as a global flow. So those are the two things. One is giving away what you yourself know that you don't need before you even start questioning your needs, and then looking for non-monetary, non-consumption ways of attending to the needs that you've identified.
Manasi, do you have some?
Yeah, I had three pieces are coming to me. So just, this will not be as nuanced as what it's about. One is around education, kind of being aware of privilege, really getting clear on what that means in your context. The second is around empathy. Because, and this is a strange thing, but it comes experientially to me as receiving empathy or certain quality of presence where you can truly, really, genuinely just be as you are, allows, for me, allowed so much of the nonsense that I thought was me to fall away. And it was releasing because energy was, you know, it was relaxing. It was, well, it was horrifying, but it was also wonderful. And the third thought that came was around play. But that's, I think, because I'm feeling a bit playful as I suggested, which is if you would, you know, I like Miki's idea, and I would say go to the woods, see what you need to be genuinely joyful in a space that is completely natural. And that's what you need in a sense. That sounds very prescriptive, but it might also be fun. So that's what's coming to me at the moment.
I think fun is always important.
I want to share a story. I don't know from what culture it comes, but I always find it very profound. The story is of some king that became very ill. And all the doctors came and they couldn't figure out what would heal the king until one doctor said, the thing that the king needs is to put on himself the shirt of a man who is happy with what he has. So all the king's men go around looking for someone who is happy with what they have, but everyone says, no, I'm not happy. I need this, I need that, I don't have this, I don't have that. And they are getting very worried because the king is getting worse and worse. Finally, they come to one village and they say, oh yeah, we know someone who is very happy with what he has. He lives at the top of this hill in a cave. If you find him, you will see. He is a very happy man. So they run up the hill, they find the man in a cave, and he's right outside the cave and he's collecting roots. And they say, are you happy with what you have? And he says, oh yes, I'm very happy. The sun is here, the rain is here. I can always dig up roots, there are flowers, there's honey. I have the cave, it's all great. And they say, fantastic. Can you please give us your shirt so that we can give it to the king, because he is ill and dying and he needs a shirt of someone who is happy with what he has. He says, I'm so sorry. I can't give you any shirt because I don't have one. That I was reminded by what Manasi shared.
Thank you, Miki. Genevieve, did you have anything that you
No, just go ahead. Yeah, no, I really
like to
don't.
share at this point, or shall we go to another question?
I should say, go ahead. Go on.
Okay, okay, great. Judith, do you have a question?
This is still on the theme of resistance to receiving. And there's a comment from Chantal that I've been living in a flow of receiving for many years now, and I find I always receive what I need, but sometimes I can only see that in retrospect. Sometimes my mind thinks I should want or need something that I don't, and so it doesn't show up. And then there's a question from Shauna how to support, or do you have any suggestions how to approach unpacking resistance to receiving?
You want to begin?
You go ahead.
First of all, I resonate with that comment. I don't have much to add to it. Unpacking a resistance to receiving, to my understanding, at least in my life, has had to do with accepting and allowing the fullness of the extremely painful shame that lives inside me. And that's work that, I mean, I think there are different approaches to it. So there are, the ways that I went about it was, one was down the NVC path. There's a trainer called Liv Larson who works on around shame. And that was really transformative for me. And then I did something which was around Brené Brown's work. And that was also really helpful. So I mean, these are two pathways that have helped. But at the essence of it is about catching the shame as it shows up, and really looking at it with an understanding that the resistance and the shame, it's protective, and it's in a very counterintuitive way. It's protecting me from what is incredibly true and beautiful and joyful inside me, because I live in a system where that beautiful, joyful, true thing is not fully welcome. So I don't know what happens when I start living from that joyful place. And because I don't know it, I'm afraid of it. And because I'm not afraid of it, because I am afraid of it, I create subconsciously or unconsciously these resistance, shame coverings. So essentially that's the pathway for me. And it was really important to also not get angry with the shame, or not hate the shame, or not hate myself for having the shame, but to really hold that with a lot of care and empathy. So that's thank you. The name was Brené Brown. The lady who I did that work with was Emma Collins. Emma Collins was doing those workshops, and that helped.
Manasi, could you say the names of the people again, or maybe put them into the chat so that we know how to spell them?
Yeah, I can put them in the chat. I'll do that.
I can add something. I have two pieces to add. One is that I believe in the practice of doing a little tiny bit of stretching beyond my capacity. So if I have a lot of resistance to receiving, I will allow myself to receive a tiny bit and grow my capacity over time by stretching and relaxing into it, stretching and relaxing into it. If I overstretch, I won't grow, because there will be kind of like a backlash within me. So that's one practice, is just to challenge myself ever so slightly to receive more than I feel comfortable. And the other is the practice of breaking isolation. It relates to shame. It's just a different path. It's exposing what is inside of me to others so that I can get support and be part of a community within which everyone is encouraged to receive. I'm seeing that quite a number of the questions arise within an individualist context. And I think we cannot restore flow individually. We can only restore flow in community. And so in community, we talk about our resistance and we create agreements within the community about how to support all of us to take steps beyond that resistance.
May I add something? I'm adding something. Okay. Yes. Sorry. The piece that I had was, I really
No,
tried.
Manasi, of course, yes.
Really tried extensively, aggressively, extensively to find an alternative to talking about the thing that's making me unhappy or talking about the things that bring me shame. And there isn't one. So just wanting to reiterate what Miki said, I think that, and it's an important, it's such a pivotal thing, but it is hard. And I love the idea of sort of, not, challenging oneself piece by piece, not overstretching, because that can lead to quite a lot of pain also.
Yes, I think that there's, it's not just, are you ready
But
for the next
If
question?
you want to say something, please go
Okay.
ahead.
No one is speaking. Nikki, what did you say?
Yes, what I'd like to say is that both Miki and
I think
we
we're
lost
having
Leticia.
trouble with Letitia's internet.
I can ask another question. This is
Please.
for Miki. This is from Mary B. How large is the nonviolent global
hello?
nonviolent global liberation community?
Okay.
Do they live in the same household?
No. It's
In the same city, town? No, I'm not done. In the same city, town, rural area. How long have they been together?
Okay. The nonviolent global liberation community is entirely virtual. There's a small group of us that is working on a longer term project of creating actual physical living community, but that is right now embryonic. It's not really happening. The actual community is entirely virtual. There are about 225 people who are engaged with the community. But of these, only about 30 are actual members, and others are, we call them friends, people who can participate in our events and in the things that we do, but they're not taking on the responsibility for sustaining the community. And of the members, in general, there are about 12 people each time who are actually making requests for money. So most of the people are sustaining themselves doing other work, and therefore they're not putting all their energy into the community. So these are a lot of the trade-offs of how to make something like this work.
How would you recommend someone start a virtual community such as yours, Miki?
I really don't know, because when I started the community, I already had a whole bunch of people who were following my work. And I invited people who were in the periphery to come and participate in doing more intensive work. So I wasn't building it from nowhere. I was building it on existing relationships. So I don't know how somebody can start without already having the basis of the relationships. Overall, I often tell people the wider and thicker your community, the more relationships you have of where people will support each other through things, the less money you need to have in the bank. So you can't just jump into experimenting if you don't have the relational basis for doing that.
I'm back. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I do have a question because both of you, Manasi and Miki, it has to do with it. Both of you are talking a lot about the process in which you have dialogue. And I know that you both engage in nonviolent communication, which means that you've had specific training in creating open dialogue. Without this tool, can you talk a little bit about why do you think communication way?
So you're
Because
still,
that builds relationship.
so I think what you need is either a high degree of personal skill and strong agreements, or a very able facilitator. You don't have to have everybody trained in nonviolent communication, but if people are not trained and don't have other skills, don't have other specific agreements, you would need somebody who can facilitate the process. I have led people through processes, not specifically about money, but I've led people through very complex processes who don't have any training. By facilitating, having the facilitator hold the transformed consciousness supports a community or a group in reaching transformative results without having had individual consciousness transformation. I generally believe that waiting until all individuals in the world have done all the trauma healing and the skill training that would be necessary is a path of no win. We need to find ways to create structural and systemic moves that can catapult a community or even a country forward in ways that the individuals then catch up.
Absolutely nothing to add to that. That's the essence. Yeah.
I have something that I wanted to add on a previous question
perfect. Thank you.
A previous question that has stayed with me. Is it possible to do that, Letitia?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, it's about a moment in which I jumped into letting go of outcome and what happened afterwards, which I think might, and it happened to me more than once, something of this nature. So I want to share that story. It happened at the end of 2015. Up until that year, every year I kind of like put together a draft budget for the organization. This is before NGL existed. This is the actual organization, the legal entity called Bay Area Nonviolent Communication, through which I've been doing all my work for almost 20 years. And so every year I would put together a budget and I planned events and workshops and clients and all of that enough to cover all the expenses. So although things changed, I had some kind of a picture of this is what the next year is going to look like in terms of budget. And I one day realized that when I do that, I leave no room for surprise, for emergence, for things that want to happen. And then if they come, I don't have space because I'm already booked and committed and all of that. And so at the end of 2015, I put in my plan only the things that I was entirely and totally passionate about. Nothing. I put nothing on the calendar that was only intended to close the gap in the budget. And we started the year with a deficit in the plan. It was an extraordinarily difficult year, not only financially and materially. It was extremely difficult in all kinds of ways. It was so difficult that I was literally worried about my health and well-being. I thought I was going to die from difficulty, that I would have so little capacity that I would run into a tree or something. Not that I would kill myself, but that I would get ill or have an accident or something. Because I counted 14 different challenges in 5 different categories. There was hardly anything in life that wasn't a challenge. People left the organization, all kinds of things happened. At the end of that year, somehow the budget balanced, in part because people left the organization and we didn't replace them because we didn't have money. So we somehow managed to do the work with the smaller staff. And then resources started coming. I can't explain this. I think people who believe in life as a flow, which I am slowly edging my way into, would see this as natural. I'm not sure of anything. I only know the experience that there was immense hardship. And now in retrospect, it looks like a kind of purification of going through an intensity. And then resources started coming and we haven't lacked since. But I'm not taking it for granted. I'm not making some kind of a cause and effect. I'm only noticing that surrendering to the flow has had astonishingly positive results over time. And I wanted to share that with people because I think there's a lot of fear that keeps us constrained within limitations. And I wanted to share it in the hopes that some people will release the fear and jump into the unknown.
Thank you, Miki. Judith, do you have one more question that you'd like to share?
Could you both say something about the spirituality of gifting?
Who wants to go?
I can go first and I can pick up from where you left off actually, because it ties in with this question for me. So for me, when you were speaking, Miki, right now, what was coming up was moments and alarmingly regular, almost day-to-day moments last year. Because last year, around for 4 to 5 months, I was basically either orchestrating the supply of rations to people who had lost their homes, or I was in a car carrying, rations to whatever. Basically, I was working with food. I didn't have a car when I began. I still don't actually have a car. It's not my car. Somebody said, I'm not really using it. So why don't you just, since you're on the ground, you may need a car. So here you go. Little did they know they may never get it back and it will never be in the same shape again. I had no money in my pocket. Or it's definitely that car has, car is not designed for 600 kilos of ration transportation. So for sure. But I had no money in my pocket. I don't think I really had a plan. But I did know, and this is where the spirituality, I guess, I don't know if spirituality is a pretty big space in that sense, but there's something about surrendering beyond, like a really intense clarity of what the values are or what the purpose is. And those are different things, I think, but definitely clarity about who am I trying to get to? What am I really trying to? What am I here for? And it's not just about surrendering to, it's not about letting go exactly for me. It's like, I know I need to do something, but it's just, I may not have all the steps laid out for me. Something with that had a lot to do with, see, because I went through a trial by fire and there really wasn't enough structuring in the emergency spaces. So I had the benefit of this complete chaos where it was so evident that there's no possible way for one person to handle all of it. There's just no way. It's not humanly, it's not going to happen. So I had to deal with this idea on a day-to-day basis that the purpose is what's driving me. It's not for me. It comes through me, but it's not really for me. It's not really mine. It doesn't belong to me. And somewhere consciously trusting that what I do and the impact range that it has will be enough. And from that point on, somebody else will take it on. And there has not been one instance, I can't think of a single instance where that hasn't happened. And this is, we reached 20, just to paint a picture, with given where we started out, through the riots, we reached about 3,000 to 5,000 people as a collective. We were collective of disorganized citizens trying to do good. It was complete chaos. And through the COVID relief work, which was slightly more structured, we reached about 27,000 people. And we did not have a plan. We just knew that this is the purpose. So for me, that clarity of purpose, who am I getting to? What's the end goal? In that case, the end goal was the last person at the end of that verified list who's not going to be able to advocate for their own needs. So that's where I want to get. So I just had that in mind. And then I have no idea how this happened. So I'm, that's what comes to me.
I think I want to add just a tiny bit, which is there's so many things that people might mean when they say spirituality. And for me, the spiritual component is relating to life as flow and continually coming back to surrender and to trust and to releasing and releasing and releasing what isn't mine, what isn't real need. And one of the things that I do is I keep trying to seed the field by always trying to give, not to give here slightly more than I receive here. And there's some kind of a sense of faith that if I keep giving, it seeds a flow, and that flow will go and care for more and more people, and also will come back and care for me. It feels spiritual to me, but it's very hard to put in words what that means. It's like, I think life cares for all that lives. And that isn't something that is possible to explain. It's just to try to experience it.
Thank you, Miki. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour, so I just want to thank both Miki and Manasi for being with us. It's been so fruitful and so interesting. And Genevieve, Vaughn, and the International Feminists for bringing us and gathering us, inspiring us to be here together. Liliana and Judith for your ever vigilant eyes and your questions, and our tech support, Diane and Elena. I want to invite you to 9 with Frida Weirden and Maria Suarez, two women who both have done a lot in terms of activism, and both had radio shows that were feminist oriented towards that. Today's video for this salon will be on our website, the maternalgifteconomymovement.org. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask when you're viewing this, you can send them to the maternalgifteconomy@gmail.com. And hopefully at our website, we'll have the contact information for both our speakers and Genevieve so that you can contact them directly if you'd like, but we'll make sure that their question gets to them. So for now, I just want to say thank you again. It was fabulous and wonderful to have you both. Manasi from India, and Miki is calling in today from Israel, and Jen is in Italy. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Be safe, be well, be kind to each other, and happy International Women's Month. Let's just celebrate. See you in 2 weeks. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.